in the state. I have a little handout here, Claire. I don't get very, I'm just trying to figure out how to share it real quick. It talks about AgriLife. If not, let's see, usually it's a button that's above, right?
Yeah, it should be like a green button, share screen, and then you can click the.
Got it. And it's on a PDF, so hopefully, can y'all see it
Yes.
with AgriLife? Okay, so this is a little bit about what we do, some statistics that we do. You know, we have 250 county offices. There are 254 counties in the state, but we are in 250 of those county offices, or in those counties, and we have an AgriLife office there with agents. Now, it may range in some smaller counties where you have just one agent that does everything. They do ag and natural resources, they do 4-H, they do family community health. In counties like mine, that's pretty large, we have an agent for every one of those disciplines so that we can be able to reach everyone. One of the big things is that we do for AgriLife, and the uniqueness is that we have programs. Most of you have maybe attended some of our programs. If you're new to AgriLife, I know with the pandemic we haven't done a lot of in-person, but we have certainly gone virtual with a lot of them, and I think that's helped a lot of people to be able to attend. So that's a good thing, one positive that came out of the pandemic. So having those educational programs from agriculture to your family consumer to youth with 4-H. We have tools and resources, a lot of tools and resources. Just call your county office and ask a question. You know, don't be afraid and wonder, oh, that question may not apply to agriculture, because for me, agriculture is 24/7 in our lives all the time. So it most likely will apply. If that agent does not know the answer to that question, kind of like me, my expertise is livestock, growing up on a ranch. So when I get horticulture questions, I call our horticulture assistant agent and say, hey, by the way, on this one, can you help me out? So a lot of resources, programming. Uh, let's see, what else? Emergency management. I don't have a lot of time right now to do a big elaborate explanation, but what I do want you to know is that we're in your county, and to find out those county offices, you can go to the internet to counties.agrilife.org. Again, counties.agrilife.org. It's going to give you a listing of all the counties. Click on your county. It'll have that home page for our AgriLife office, and you can contact them. Another big thing that has come with the pandemic, and maybe more with Harvey, when Harvey hit, AgriLife got involved big time, because we are in every county, and the resources that we have or that we can pull together in an emergency time, they created the strike to be a part of that strike team. So since the pandemic hit, we initiated the Pony Express, where we travel. We partner with the National Guard. Right now, I'm at the Armory this week, on duty for at the Armory. And we started with PPEs and any supplies that went out to medical facilities. Our last assignment now is, of course, the vaccines, getting all those vaccines to everyone. So most of the time I'm on the road doing that while I'm preparing programs for the county as well. So very proud to know that AgriLife is a big player in helping in emergency management, and right now with the pandemic and getting all these vaccines out there. Trying to think of anything else that I may have forgotten. Let's see if these are just some more statistics. If you're interested, you can email me. I'll send you this little guide here that's got some more information. But from protecting the environment, enriching youth with that 4-H, improving your health with our family consumer agents and their resources, from diabetes. They've got the Walk Across Texas. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's going on right now. And you simply walk across the state, and with not so much being open, people have gotten very creative on how they've gotten their steps in. And then, of course, growing the economy, because we know agriculture is a big player in our economy. So, Claire, with that, that's all I've got today. Just remember that we're in your county, and reach out to them with any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And as she mentioned, I mean, they're AgriLife Extension, they're involved in a lot. So they're a great resource. Whether you're in Dallas County or in another county, they're there, and definitely good for programming, or just, if you don't know who to contact in the county. So Elizabeth, if you don't mind, maybe can you put your contact information in the chat box?
Yes, I sure will. Yes.
Thank you. And so with that, yep, Heather, thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Heather, who's going to give you all an update on the Joe Pool Lake Watershed Protection Plan. I think you might be muted, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I haven't used Zoom in a long time. Okay, I don't even know how to fix that, but all right. So I'm on an island and we're going to talk about inland Joe Pool Lake Watershed. I'm going to give you an update on phase 1 and phase 2. So just an FYI, my camera's over here, but my monitors are over here. So I'm switching back and forth. Alrighty, so let me scroll through this. So we've wrapped up phase 1 monitoring, our analysis of historical data report, our data collection report, and our final report in February. And we're currently conducting our stakeholder meetings, doing our data analysis and modeling, and developing our watershed protection plan. So as you can see here, phase 1 wrapped up end of 2020. And we're right in the middle of 2021. And here we are hoping to, you can see my mouse, 2022, 2023, the TCEQ EPA approval process. We're hoping that our project will be accepted beginning of 2022, end of 2022, and then we can start applying for 319 funding for certain projects in 2023. So we submit the draft EPA in hopefully February and then hear back from them by August. So if the presentation ends up being shared with you all, you'll be able to click on these embedded links to find where our historical data report is, our data collection report, all upcoming meetings, and where we are in the process. So here is a review of our watershed. So as Claire had said, we're located in multiple counties. We're in Dallas, Ellis, Johnson, and Tarrant. We span all 4. Our Walnut Creek subwatershed up here stems from the west. The Mountain Creek watershed down here is from the southeast. And our land use includes urban, suburban, industrial, municipal, agricultural, and several parks. The Joe Pool Lake designated uses based on TCEQ are public water supply. So we're a drinking water source. It's supporting aquatic life, supporting contact recreation. So you can swim, boat, fish, you can consume the fish, as well as general use. So the project goals, the purpose of our watershed protection plan is to protect the water quality of Joe Pool Lake, as well as protecting the tributaries. And then we are also trying to improve the water quality by addressing the nitrate concern that was in the Mountain Creek arm and the bacteria impairment in Walnut Creek. So the 2014 nitrate concern in Mountain Creek and the 2014 bacteria impairment in Walnut Creek have since been removed. But this is what they were based on. So the criteria for Walnut Creek was 126 most probable number per 100 milliliters of water, and it exceeded it at 195.6. And the screening level for the Joe Pool Lake Mountain Creek arm for nitrate is at 0.37, but it exceeded it at 0.74. So as of now, it is not listed in the 2020 Texas Integrated Report. All right. So what was our parameters were total dissolved solids, total suspended solids, volatile suspended solids. Nutrients, we looked at nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll A. Bacteria, we were looking at E. coli, and we had a routine regime, a flow biased regime, and a special study. So the flow biased was flow targeted sampling. So we were trying to target wet weather events. And then the special study actually was including tampling or using optical brighteners. And that was to identify these dye compounds that were associated with laundry detergent. So that's an indirect way of measuring bacterial contamination. But after conducting that research, it was found that the results were inconclusive. So we did not include that in our data collection report. So we had 14 sites, 14 routine that we went out to monthly, and we had 6 high flow targeted sites. Some of these sites had been sampled since 1981, so we'll have a pretty significant historical analysis in our modeling report that will end up coming out end of August. So I'm going to go through the results of our sampling, and just keep in mind this is based off 12 samples at each site. So this does not include any historical data. So our E. coli geomean summary, so highlighted in red are geomeans that surpass the E. coli standard of 126. Specifically Walnut Creek, labeled with WC. Those are the ones that do show an impairment for E. coli based on 12 samples per site. And so during that sampling period, when we did get the high E. coli measurements, it was found that there were dry or pooled sites upstream. There was an aerial imagery review conducted and a creek stomp to locate any potential sources. At that time, they did not find anything obvious. So we're looking forward to Dr. Srini, who's our contractor at Texas A&M AgriLife, to conduct our select and SWOT modeling to try and determine where the loadings specifically to the sub-watersheds are coming from. So a quick comparison with E. coli versus flow. So we see down in the lower left-hand corner that they are aggregated together in those low flow conditions. So it could mean that the E. coli is coming from a point source, such as a discharge from a pipe. But then as you move up the trend line towards the right, you can see that E. coli is significantly higher. So this could mean that it's related to storm. So it's a storm influence runoff. Nitrate average overall was lower than the screening limit of 0.37 for the lake and 1.95 for streams, except at a sampling location right over here in Mountain Creek, and it's known as Soap Creek. So much of the watershed is grass and cropland, and there's a concentrated area along US 67 right here. And it has several industrial complexes, a cement production plant. It also has a wastewater treatment plant and a flood prevention structure known as Padira Lake. So there's no environmental standards. There are only screening levels for nitrate and phosphate. So right now it does exceed the standard. So we will continue to do monitoring over there. But this is one point that goes back to why we're developing this watershed protection plan, is to figure out the loading and working with stakeholders to come up with best management practices to implement a change to reduce those, that increase in concentration into the water. Total phosphorus, it was below the screening limit for 0.69 milligrams per liter and 0.20 for the lake for all sampling locations. Chlorophyll A, it was below the screening limit of 26.7 micrograms per liter for lakes and 14.1 micrograms per liter for the streams, except again at that Mountain Creek location, and that is correlated back to the fact that we have that flood control structure, Padira Lake, which is upstream of Soap Creek, and that is a source of high chlorophyll A. So all of that data can be found in our data collection report that you can access on our trinityra.org website. And I did also want to throw this in, just pulling this from our analysis of historical data report that's also available. It shows a long-term trend analysis from 1997 to 2016, and it revealed that there was a statistically significant increasing trend in Joe Pool Lake for dissolved oxygen. Total suspended solids, so highlighted in orange, and chlorophyll A. And then within the tributary itself, it shows a decrease for pH, or sorry, it shows a decrease for E. coli in green. So our upcoming meetings, we have on May 11th, our fourth stakeholder meeting, and it will be going over agricultural BMPs and hearing from NRCS and the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board on funding sources. And our project is funding from the TCEQ, as well as local match funding from the cities of Cedar Hill, Grand Prairie, Mansfield, and Midlothian. All right. I whizzed through that much quicker than I thought I would. So any questions on any of the data or upcoming meetings, please let me know.
Yeah, I'll wait to see if any come through the chat, but also could you post how they could register for your meeting in the chat as well?
Oh, yes.
One question is, so is the grant from TCEQ or EPA?
So it's through the Clean Water Act 319 program. So the TCEQ administers the funds, but it's from the EPA as a whole. I hope that answered that question. All right. Meeting, pulling this up. Where's the chat box?
Another question just came in asking, has any source tracking been done on the E. coli?
Source tracking, no, we did not receive funding to do the bacterial source tracking. I think it'd be really interesting to do that, but not yet. Once we see what the modeling comes back from Dr. Srini at Texas A&M and we're able to narrow down the sub watersheds, then we'll broach that topic.
And then another question was, why in the TCEQ Lake project purposes identified, it didn't include that Jill Pool was also a flood control project or being a flood control project?
That might have been overlooked. We just pulled the TCEQ designated uses list. And so pulled directly from there. So maybe it could have been overlooked. But yes, it is a flood control project.
Any other questions? I guess just one comment was flood control is the primary purpose, and isn't it a designated use category?
No, flood control isn't a designated use.
Oh, isn't a designated, yeah.
Yeah, no, flood control is, its primary purpose is the public water supply. Let me go back. I will share the designated uses from the Texas Integrated Report. And then Spencer, we can have a sidebar conversation on it. There's multiple. Jeremy Spencer. Okay, sorry. So how many tributaries are part of the protection plan? There are two. We have Mountain Creek and Walnut Creek, and then we have a lot of, so the main two tributaries, Walnut Creek and Mountain Creek, they have multiple small streams coming into them. But then along the outer portions of the arms, there are a lot of other small creeks. So I guess the main two tribs that we identify are Walnut Creek and Mountain Creek in the plan. But overall, we're addressing all of these streams in the watershed. So everything in this, I don't have a square footage or acre, but everything that you see pictured on this PowerPoint. Let's see. Pulling up the designated uses. All right. Anything else? I'll put my email in here.
Yeah, that'd be great. And
So the first link I put in there for TrinityRA.org, Joe Pool Lake, that has a list of all of our meetings, and that is where you can sign up for our May 11th stakeholder meeting. And then the second link I put in there is for designated uses for the Texas Integrated Report, and then my email. So yeah, we're hoping to get everything finalized. So May, we'll have a draft of the modeling and data analysis from Dr. Srini. June, we'll be going over so May 11th, we're finalizing chapters 1 through 3. June 16th, we're meeting with our steering committee to finalize the potential pollutant sources and implementation measures. And then in August, we'll be finalizing all of the chapters with the implementations with the public and finalizing our modeling, and then hopefully getting a draft to the general public and TCEQ end of August for public comment, and then to the EPA in November. So we have a lot ahead.
Yeah. That's exciting. Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate you presenting about the work, and I encourage everyone to participate in those public meetings. I've been involved in some of the watershed protection planning, and definitely having stakeholder support is so important to make it a successful plan. So I will quickly share my screen again. So now I want to go and start our discussion on the online Riparian course. And I hope most of you were able to watch all of the videos, but I know there's a few, and you know, things get busy. So even if you haven't watched them all, you're still going to have access to them. So I hope that you will go back and finish them following this discussion. I just want to start quickly introducing you to the instructors and who we have here, so you kind of know who goes with what topic, and kind of refresh your memory on some of the information you learned through the module. So my name's Claire Escamilla with the Texas Water Resources Institute. So I did the introduction to watersheds and best management practices and local resources slide. Melissa Parker and Ryan McGillicuddy are our duo from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, who cover how creeks function and some of that geomorphology. Melissa did the recording of the module on the course, but we have Ryan here today to answer questions. Ricky Lennox was our presenter for the Riparian Vegetation, as well as that stream walk across Texas video that he created. He is recently retired, I think as of January, but we're really fortunate that he is still staying on and helping us participate and instruct in this program virtually and in person. He's a great resource with a lot of good knowledge about the riparian plants and their benefits around Texas. And then we have Mac Martin and Lori Hazel with the Texas A&M Forest Service. They are two of the forestry instructors that come to our program and talk about how the trees' roles in watershed protection, and again talks about some good management practices for managing your trees in your riparian areas. We've got Josh Hessel with the A&M Natural Resource Institute, and he did the videos with feral hog management. So talking about how feral hogs are wild pigs, they're kind of the issues we are facing here in Texas and ways you can manage their populations. And then we've got Kyle Wright with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. He has the PowerPoint presentation that talks about those financial and technical assistance that's available through NRCS. So if you are a landowner and interested in implementing some of the management practices or want more information, he's a great resource, as well as your local NRCS agents. So that's who we've got here today. We've got a great panel to help answer any questions you may have or clarifications you need. To get the ball rolling, we've have a couple questions to get it started. So it's helpful if you open this up on a separate, if you have your phone, a tablet, or maybe a separate So you can see the results as they come in. You can use the QR code or go to menti.com and enter this code up at the top. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop sharing for 1 second so I can pull up the page. Here we go. So you can see up at the top still that code that you can go to be able to get the questions. And so the first question I'd like you to answer, and you have up to 3 options, is what do you see as the greatest benefit to proper riparian management? Great. So yeah, I see them slowly coming in. Water quality is definitely a big one. And that's one of the, why we see some of the benefits of doing these in places where watershed protection plans are going on, because we see that joint goal of improving water quality. Habitat improvement, recreation, swimming, that's a big one. Vegetation, environment, yeah, great. So y'all are picking up on a lot of those big themes we were trying to touch on during the module. Great, I'm gonna leave it open just 10 more seconds. You have any other final thoughts on some of those good benefits? Erosion control, stabilizing banks, definitely those good root structures. And then so y'all have picked up, and we know that there are these benefits to properly managing our riparian areas. Hopefully you learned about some of the implementation measures. What we're also interested is, are there any possible barriers to implementing some of the practices that we talked about? If it's funding or maybe HOAs or other possible issues, but if they're shared property rights, yeah, time. I know we hear a lot, yeah, renting, folks who don't own property, so trying to figure out what they can do. City parks, yeah, shared property rights, lack of understanding. Hopefully, for those with the lack of understanding, if you have any questions, please ask us during this discussion, and we can try to help. Funding, we'll definitely try to touch on some of those NRCS programs or other areas where you might be able to find some funding to help implement. Okay, looks like it's slowing down. Great, so definitely funding's a big one. So we'll definitely try to touch on that today. And hopefully, lack of understanding or knowledge about riparian areas, hopefully we can, help clear some of that up today too, or at least start that conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm gonna open back up the slide here and bring it back to our instructors, and I will open it up. If y'all have any questions, you can start putting them into the chat. If not, I'm wondering, Kyle, do you want to start and maybe talk a little bit more about some of those NRCS funding opportunities, since that was kind of shown as a big barrier for several folks.
Sure. Sure, Claire, I can do that. Let me bring that up. Yeah, funding opportunities coming up as a major issue. It's not really a surprise. Of course, financing is always a concern or an issue anytime you run into any of this where you're trying to get some work done, and some of this work can be quite expensive. But yes, I'll just talk for a few minutes, Claire, and if I go too long, just stop me, no problem. I'm gonna talk for a few minutes about funding opportunities and where assistance may be available from our agency. Before I go into that, I always like to mention that there is funding available from lots of different sources, as you're seeing, as you watch the PowerPoints, and as you've seen Claire announcing all the folks that are involved in it in this presentation. There are numerous organizations, and nearly all of these have assistance available in one form or another, either technical assistance or financial assistance. So just keep that in mind as we go through. Basically, within Nrcs, our programs are funded through the Farm Bill. Farm Bills run for about 5 to 7 years. We're currently under the 2018 Farm Bill. And under this Farm Bill, there are various programs where assistance is available to individuals that request it. Some of the programs, probably the most common program that we have is one called the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And you're probably more familiar with hearing that if you've heard it before, referred to as EQIP, EQIP. It's our most common financial assistance program, and this is a program where it is available to individuals. If they're interested, they need to contact the local field office and talk to those folks in there. What our folks are going to want to do, they're going to encourage you to develop a conservation plan on your property that will kind of give a schedule or an outline of all the different things that you would like to see to make improvements and address resource concerns on your property. Once that conservation plan is developed, then you're in the driver's seat, so to speak. You're setting well to apply for EQIP to address some of these needs through that conservation plan by applying conservation practices. The way EQIP works, it's a competitive process in that everybody in the county or the area will who applies will be scored and ranked on a national ranking that basically is looking at what practices will give us the best benefits for the least cost, and that's kind of how it ranks out. However, Texas, at least in Texas anyway, we've been very successful in that if somebody applies to do something that's of merit and worth, it will get funded. It may not get funded initially, but over time, we tend to be able to take care of these things. And this EQIP program is our primary program for doing that. We have other programs as well. There's a second one that I want to touch on, Conservation Stewardship Program. This program is available through Nrcs as well. And basically, this program is designed for a landowner that is a pretty good conservationist and already doing a pretty good job of taking care of their land. It's a little different than EQIP in that it doesn't necessarily just pay for a conservation practice, but it gives an annual payment for 5 years for and that payment's in 2 parts. The first part of that annual payment is kind of incentive payment to help you with all the stuff that you've already done. And then the second part of that payment is to do some other things to help to improve the resource conditions on your property as well. So those are two of the main ones. There's several others. There are easement programs that are available to provide conservation easements, wetland easements, different things like that. But Claire, basically that's it. I can go on and talk about some more, or if there's any questions, I can answer that, or whatever you need.
We do have two questions that I think relate to what you were talking about, and
Okay.
One was, is there a minimum amount of land to be considered a landowner?
No, there's not. There are some requirements and restrictions for financial assistance. But as far as land ownership size, it's actually in the Farm Bill that we cannot give preferential treatment or discriminate one way or the other based on the size of a property. So no, small acreages are eligible and score and rank just as well as large acreages.
Great. And then are there any funds available to rid lands of mesquite, which are water depleters?
Sure. Brush control is one of the issues that we offer financial assistance on, most definitely. It has to be of a certain thickness, and that can all be worked out with your individual in the field office. Just go talk to them. If you're willing to invite them out, they'll need to take some measurements and see just how thick the mesquite is. But yes, there is both mechanical and chemical treatment on brush is a fairly common conservation practice that we utilize. I would caution people though, however, I don't promote that in the riparian area itself. On the uplands, yes, of course.
Great, thank you, Kyle. And then we had another question, and I think you might have some ideas and we can open it up to the other instructors too. So I saw mention of people not being landowners. So I wonder if you have a resource to recommend for someone who does not own land and or lives in a town or city to better understand the effect they have on the watershed and what they can do to directly help their local watershed.
Excuse me. Allergies are eating me up, have been all spring, but I promise you it's not COVID. I'm vaccinated and everything's good. I just got that hacking cough. But yes, well, the first thing, obviously, the people that are here today, you've made the first step because this is an excellent program that's hosted across the state. We do a really good job. Claire and her bunch does an excellent job of organizing these and hosting these, and these help folks get involved. Other things is if your watershed has a watershed partnership, those are also excellent groups to link up with. And a lot of those are ongoing across the state. They'll keep you in tune with what's going on with your watershed. There's contact your Texas A&M Extension Service. They provide excellent information. And we have a good relationship between our agency and theirs as far as sharing information and customers back and forth based on the needs. So yeah, just because you don't own land or own land on a creek does not mean you can't be involved and it's not important to you. There are all sorts of opportunities. And Claire, I'm sure I'm missing some, but just off the top of my head, that's what I've got. If some of the other instructors want to comment as well, that's great.
I saw Ryan raise his hand. Do you have something to add?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'd just like to add that if you'd like to get involved in efforts to, volunteer efforts to protect natural resources, aquatic resources in your area, one of the most effective ways to become involved if you're not a landowner with, land in your control that you can manage is teaming up with your local Texas Master Naturalist chapter. There's a number of service projects that they have in the areas that I work in the Hill Country. Specifically, there's a number of groups that are very involved in riparian management service projects, everything from invasives removal to native plantings, to conducting technical guidance outreach visits with landowners themselves. So you may have an active chapter already engaged in those types of practices. And if not, then and you become involved in the Master Naturalist chapters, you can propose and solicit funding from the program to initiate a service project that's focused on riparian management.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Another question we have is, I have a large ravine that acts as an ephemeral creek. Should that area be managed in the same way as other creeks and waterways?
I can take a stab if you want at that, Claire. You know, without seeing it, it's hard to diagnose specifically how you should manage that area. But you know, any drainage path where water is going to enter and move on down to a more defined creek or waterway, vegetation should help resist erosive forces and should be managed in a similar fashion. You know, giving it that buffer, allowing the plants to filter pollutants, to stabilize the stream bank, to slow and capture sediment, etc. Everything that was in the presentation that you've reviewed already. So yes, ephemeral creeks, drainage ways, give them their space to move, the vegetation, a place to grow, and get it into that proper functioning condition. That said, in some of these more urbanizing systems, the vegetation alone might not be able to resist some of the down cutting that's happening at watershed scales due to increased impervious cover, et cetera. But that's just something you'd have to kind of, get somebody to look at specifically if the vegetation is not going to be adequate in and of itself.
Hey, Claire, this is Kyle. One thing I would add to, I was just thinking about this after I got off a while ago. Ryan mentioned about these watersheds that are urbanizing, and the question was asked about non-landowners. Basically, all of the conservation practices that we promote in these agriculture settings within Nrcs, or these rural settings, and these acreage landowners, they apply to us homeowners just as well. I myself personally, I come from an agriculture background. I grew up on farm and ranch and was involved in that in the early part of my life. Since going to work for the government, I'm a homeowner, and that's it. I don't have any land anymore. I live on a half acre on the banks of Salado Creek, and the things of it is I can tell you that I follow the same practices that a farmer would with my lawn. Trying to go more native, trying to apply less fertilizers, trying to apply no pesticides, trying to reduce any kind of detrimental runoff that's coming off my yard, just like I would on a landowner. And the more I look and see, I find that nearly every out on the landscape in these situations fits on a homeowner with a little bit of land for acreages. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's a great point, Kyle, and I'll just echo that and support that comment. And things like rainwater catchment can reduce the amount of water that's being shed by impervious surface on your property if you're just a homeowner in town. Rain gardens, bioswales, things that capture the runoff from your property, allow it to slow and sink in, can have an impact at watershed scales before it gets to those municipal storm sewer systems and races down into the creek. So even encouraging your local government to consider LID, low impact development type practices, which are things like bioswales and rain gardens on the uplands that capture that water and allow it to sink in before it sheds off. So that's a great point, Kyle.
One additional thought, if this is an ephemeral creek, it's not going to have contact with the water table. The vegetation's not. So you may want to concentrate on establishing the plants that can survive the dryness, that their roots would not have access to the water underground. So the plants that are on that list of vegetation that should be as a handout you received, the facultative plants, wet plants would probably be the best choice, and try to just manage for good cover. As Ryan mentioned, we've got to do everything we can to help these creeks, but you're probably not going to be able to use the same plants that you would on a perennial creek, one that does have contact with the underground water table. So again, take care of all the creeks. If the creek has a very steep side slope, 45-degree slope or greater, it's hard for vegetation to become established. So it may be laying back that creek bank or adding some fill and very rapidly getting some grasses growing might help it. But the main thing is just get some vegetation on it to keep it from further eroding. And as you mentioned, the water harvesting may help reduce the amount of runoff going into it.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. And those plant lists that he mentioned, so in his module 3, up at the top, there's a little link to download those PDFs, which are those riparian lists. And there's several, depending on what area of Texas you're in. So you'll find that region, and those are the common riparian plants. So if you didn't get a chance to download those, you can go back to his presentation and download those. I haven't seen some more questions, so please feel free to continue as we're chatting to write them in, and we'll make sure to go through and address them. But Ricky, since you were just talking, I was wondering, maybe since vegetation is such a big part of riparian management, just kind of touch on a few key points from your presentation.
Well, most of the time we want to see the creeks, and that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. We want to see the creek and enjoy the creek, but the creek needs pretty heavy vegetation. And sometimes people want to go in and clear out brush right at the water's edge to make it easier to see the creek. We have to be careful doing that, because if you lose, and again, the tree roots are probably the most stable plants that you can have. Their roots go the deepest, much deeper than grasses or forbs. And so maintaining good woody cover is important. If you want to clear a little opening that you can go down and see the creek, that's okay, but don't clear 200, 300 yards wide, because that could make a weak spot in the vegetation that could allow that creek to begin eroding or cutting the banks there. Vegetation is, again, one of the key things we use to stabilize the creeks for repair, restoration. Mother Nature puts some good vegetation down on the creeks, and the more the seasonal and perennial creeks have access to the water table, so we've got access to those wetter plants that can survive, the obligate plants, obligate wetland plants, very useful. They like to have, and it depends on where you are in the state. If you're in the hill country, a lot of different plants will grow there than, say, grow in the Blackland Prairie, because the Blackland Prairie is, the riparian areas are heavily woody tree based. We don't get as much sunlight hitting the ground, so we don't see the forbs, the grasses, the sedges that you often see in the more open creeks of the hill country, coastal areas. So it depends on the creeks. Again, the vegetation is sometimes hard to learn the different types, but if you just try to learn one plant a week and using any of the plant guides that you have, this remarkable riparian publication is most excellent. Shows a lot of plants from all across the state, gives their values, a lot of good photos. But just try to learn these plants, and it'll make you a better manager of your riparian areas.
Thank You, Ricky. One question we had come in was, I'm curious if there is some friction between HOAs and these necessary actions to stop pesticide pollutants, runoff, and short mowing practices, especially since we have so many new developments popping up in Texas.
Well, the homeowner associations are a lot like some urban areas. They don't understand the needs of a creek. They want to see it just like a golf course, mowed, clean, no sand deposits, no brush piling up. These things are natural to a creek, and we need to just educate people better on that. If we go in and clean these and mow these, they're not going to have plant diversity. They're not going to be very stable. Short plants have short roots, especially with grasses. So if you mow them short, they're just going to be weakened. Hard drought may kill some of those short, weakened plants. If you have taller grasses, that helps with capturing runoff, including pollutants. So it's a give and take. It's an educational process, I think, that we've got to go through. They need to see some good creeks that are under good management and see how things look when we take care of it the proper way. And we just need to adjust our eye, calibrate our eye that this is not a golf course. This is a riparian area.
Yeah, thank you. And I see Ryan raised his hand. Do you have something to add?
Sure. Like Ricky said, it's always an educational process. And, kind of changing people's mentality about what is beautiful can be can sometimes only be achievable on a generational scale. It can take a long time to change how people view these types of things. I have had some success, with leading kind of informal workshops like this in areas of the hill country that are, rural but urbanizing, where you might have an HOA park that's installed along a common waterway. So you'll have maybe a river park or a creek front park where the homes are set back away from it, and it's a common use area. And the most effective way that I've been able to kind of change how or influence how those HOAs manage those properties is by conducting outreach, going and talking about it, and also meeting them where they're at. Meaning, what do you use this for? Where do you use it? What are your management goals? And how can we accommodate some of those, some of those access and recreational goals and values, and integrate some of these more ecological functions? And it's a give and take. And so that a lot of times that goes with identifying where they use the areas and saying, fine, that's your sacrificial area. That's where you're going to mow and maintain it. Grass. But if you've got 200 yards of creek front, do you really need all 200? Or do you just need 20 here and then a grow zone area and then another 20 yards here, and kind of really target where people can get in? And there's really good examples of heavy use areas throughout the state that have been well managed, but also provide incredible access. Places like if you go look at the website for Blue Hole Park in Wimberley, they've got targeted access points along that creek, interspersed with riparian grow zones, and they accommodate a few hundred people a day getting into that creek. So it is possible to accommodate both. It just takes kind of finding meeting people where they're at, and having a little bit of give and take.
Thank you. That's a great point. How do you balance the needs of keeping vegetation in the riparian zone with the task of removing invasive species?
I'll start it, and I bet Kyle or Ryan will have some more to add. I think it's when we're dealing with invasives, it's going to be more, as much as possible, it needs to be hand-to-hand combat. Don't take the heavy equipment down in those riparian areas, because you're very likely going to do more damage than you are good. So if it's a non-root sprouting species, you can use girdling, just taking a chainsaw or an axe and cutting through the cambium all the way around the tree. If they're small trees, you may use a cut stump method, or any size tree, I guess, for that matter. But with privet, people are having success cutting the tree off at 2 to 4 inches above the ground with a chainsaw, and then painting the top of the stump immediately. And I don't remember the chemical that does the best with that one, but that is an option. You can find the chemical through your county extension office, the NRCS, and probably Texas Parks and Wildlife offices have the bulletin, and you can look it up online. It's if you just Google ERM 1466, that is the Extension Service publication for brush and weed control. And it will tell you how to mix the chemical, what to use it on, all of that information. If you're dealing with ash juniper or eastern red cedar, all you have to do with those is just cut them off at the ground, cut them off below the lowest green branch, and they die. If you've got redberry juniper on your creek, the western half of the state of Texas has redberry juniper, and you cut it off, it sprouts back just like mesquite. So you need to know what species is the problem. Chinaberry is a big problem. It's invasive. Honey locust has become somewhat of a problem in some of our creeks, and it will sprout. So identification of what you're dealing with, and then looking in that 1466 will give you some idea of how you can start control.
Did any other instructors have any thoughts before we move to the next question?
Sure, I'll just add that, if you've got a couple invasive species here and a couple invasive species there, and you've got some other native plants that are growing up in between, then it's probably okay to go ahead and just go treat those right away. Get rid of them if the infestation is relatively minimal. However, if you've got a monoculture of some type of invasive where you've got just only Chinaberry trees or only Arundodonax or only Mexican needlegrass or something like that, it's just dominating and covering the area, you'll have to be somewhat methodical about the timing and staging and phasing of how you treat those, because you don't want to just wipe everything out at once, because then you'll end up with bare ground that has no stability. Even invasive plants provide some stabilizing function, some flood function, some water quality function. They're just not preferable to our native species. So if you go in and attack a little bit, at a time, and then replace those with natives, and then move downstream, attack another area, etc., that can minimize some of the negative impacts that you might have from more overzealous treatment. And depending on the size of your property and how noxious or invasive a species is, you might just have to make some value judgments on what you're willing to give and what you're willing to take out and what you're willing to leave, because it might not be a practicable use of your time, energy, and money to take out every single Chinaberry tree when there's other land management concerns that you have, because it can take a lot of energy, and it might not be the biggest threat. But there are certainly some species that are much more noxious than others. So once you identify it, just kind of reach out to your county extension agents or Parks and Wildlife or whomever and figure out how big of a concern this is.
Claire, this is Kyle. I agree with everything Ricky and Ryan are saying. And my caution right along the coattails of Ryan there is just don't go crazy. Some invasives are more tolerable or I can tolerate them more in the riparian than others. Some things I see, I got to go take care of it right now and get it out of there. Others, and honestly, I'm thinking about mesquite. If there's a few mesquites down there, I don't worry about it too much. But if it's Chinese tallow or one of these highly aggressives and I've only got a few, I'm going to jump on it and take care of it right away and try to stop that. And yeah, definitely, if it's a solid stand of, I'm thinking of salt cedar. I'm a far West Texas guy, and we deal with that, where it's solid stands of salt cedar, and you take care of that and eradicate it, and you don't have anything else to cover it, you're kind of in worse shape than you were when you started. And so we need to gradually work through that, I believe, and don't just clear the whole creek bank at once, but maybe work on small sections and get it back established to native, and then move on to the next.
One additional consideration is let's say you do clear all the invasives off your property. Where did they come from? They came from upstream from some other source. So you need to work on this almost as a community and try, every landowner up and down the creek, try to do this same work and get rid of the seed source. And eventually you'll dry up, you know, that invasive from being able to spread.
I
Yeah.
agree 100% with what Ricky's saying there. And the other thing that I would add is this tackling invasives is not a one and done practice, because they are washing in, the seed sources are there upstream, that this is something that you may do annually. You know, it may be every couple of years you have to go back and treat it, but it's not something you can just be done once and not have to worry about anymore. It's kind of a continual practice.
Just like through the years with mesquite, we've changed the terminology. It started out, we thought we could eradicate mesquite. Then we were going to use brush management or brush control to lessen the mesquite. And then we decided brush management, maybe we're going to just manage what we have. And then now brush sculpting, we're just picking out certain mesquites, you know, so we've got to adapt to how much is there, how much can we control, and just do the best we can with what we have. We're not going to get rid of all the undesirables in one lifetime.
Yeah, thank you. I think those are all great points. The next question is, what are some good classes we can take to learn more in-depth info about native plants?
Well, the Master Naturalist program, if you're a member of that, they do offer some plant identification classes at their state meetings. There are various chapters of the Native Plant Society of Texas that has field days where they offer plant ID training. Parks and Wildlife, Nrcs, AgriLife, we all kind of work together and offer trainings. Probably one additional way would be to just find someone in your county that's pretty good with plants and go out with them and go on a botany walk. If you want to look at the riparian plant, if you want to look at the plants on the uplands, go up there and walk around, but get with someone who knows the plants and they can help introduce you to clues to identify the plants. And I'll turn it over to any of the other instructors that want to add their best tips.
Those are all great organizations, institutions to learn from and keep an eye on for training opportunities, informal training opportunities. This, Society for Ecological Restoration is another a good one in Texas that offers continuing education and courses and things like that. If you want to move more into the more formal types of educational settings where you might spend, a day, 2-3 days out and you're paying an instructor, there's courses through private groups like the Wetland Training Institute will come a couple times a year down to Texas and offer a training in wetland plant identification. Sometimes they'll do that in the DFW area or the Houston area. Or they also have online. Those are a little more expensive, but they are, geared towards instruction for professionals. I've taken some before and they're very intensive, but very informative, but that's where you're going to pay a little bit more money from. But some of these informal courses that Ricky mentioned through those organizations are great ways of just kind of getting your feet wet and getting comfortable with IDing some of the plants in your area.
Great. This next question kind of goes back to our HOA discussion. So I work with for a city park department. Even with education, it's difficult to get HOAs, especially residents, to accept a properly adjusted creek. Any additional resources we can provide to HOAs and homeowners, properly managed creek instead of properly managed creek. Yeah.
Well, signage of a good looking creek showing why the plants are there, why they're not mowing, why is there a buffer between the creek and the sidewalk or walking trail. These are all things that can be done. And I think signage is one of the best because it's there 24 hours a day when there's no one else there to explain, why that's not being mowed. A good sign gives a good story.
That's a great point, Ricky. And I neglected to mention that earlier when I was talking about how I work with, some of these creekfront parks. Signage is absolutely integral to maintaining it, but also that messaging and signage that conveys it in a way that you're doing something intentionally. So that I can't remember if it was in the modules, but about the City of Austin grow zones. I believe that was in the webinar modules. But when they first instituted that program, it was called the No Mow Zone. But people in the public, you're not doing your proper management. But when they turn that into a positive, a proactive grow zone, we are actually doing something here. It changed the messaging and garnered more acceptance. And so, I have landowners all over the hill country that we've assisted with signage so that their neighbors don't look at them negatively. And those signs, can say anything like grow zone or, ecological restoration and progress, those types of things. It gives, it lets, passerbys and neighbors and the public know that this is an intentional process and that you have a goal in mind, and that goal is, ecological, and it's to the benefit of the creek. So signage is absolutely, critical, I think, to conveying that. It also, if you put it at the boundary of where that grow zone has been established, a lot of people hire out maintenance, and it lets maintenance folks know that's where they should stop mowing, is right on that line. So yeah, it's critical. Great point, Ricky.
The next question is, I need to clear old trees and brush from previous storms that are blocking my creek flow. When and how should this happen?
Well, it's hard to answer without seeing it. Now, if it's up against a bridge, you probably, just need to get it out of the creek to where it won't create a blockage that might weaken that bridge and take it out. If it's just scattered trees up and down the creek that are piling up, the creek will actually begin to incorporate those trees into the banks of the creek. Sediment will come in on the next flood or high flow event and begin to cover over those trees. We think about putting rebar in our concrete foundations or sidewalks to give it strength. Those trees act more like putting an I-beam down in the creek, way more stable than just putting rebar down. Rebar would be like the roots of our trees and grasses, but when you lay that tree down and it gets buried up, it gives a lot of protection from the next flood flow event that might try to wash that bank away. So again, this is almost a site-specific eyeballs on the situation to try to say this needs to come out or this needs to stay. But we have to be careful. It's probably, to err on the side of caution would be to leave more brush than you take out. Again, if it's right where you fish and you want to clean a little spot 50 foot wide, go for it, take it out. But most of the time we recommend leaving the brush in the creek.
Yeah, and if it's on a bigger, in addition to the root material, inside the banks, providing that stabilizing force, that woody material, wood and rock in the stream add what's called channel roughness. And as water, travels down that channel, it'll come up against, the resistance from that material, slow the erosive forces down, help things spread out. So we don't get these higher peak flows in some of these urbanizing systems that we see. And eventually, some of those will become incorporated into the banks and help trap sediment, slow the erosive flow, allow it to sink in. So, wood on the banks, wood in the channel can be a positive, and good for habitat as well. The fish need cover, the amphibian life in there needs cover in places to root. The material degrades and eventually provides nutrient matter for the base of the food web, the invertebrates, the aquatic invertebrates that need that. So if it's a threat to infrastructure, or if it's a larger system that you can actually kayak or navigate down, then there might be areas where you need to cut lanes because there's, a threat to navigation or safety. But be methodical and leave as much material as you can.
As far as when and how should this happen, I guess right now would be the best time to do it. You do it now to allow vegetation to become reestablished in the areas where you might disturb by pulling those trees out. If you do it in the late fall during the winter, the ground's going to stay bare for several more months. But if you do it now, it's going to grass back over just in 60 days.
Yeah. This next was just a comment from someone saying that the new roads and impervious surfaces are some of the biggest culprits in the degradation of these riparian areas. And they mentioned specifically US 360 and some of the feeder roads have increased the stream velocity into Walnut Creek, which I think was part of that Joe Pool watershed. So I don't know if y'all have any additional information you want to add about kind of the increased roads and impervious surfaces.
Other than just, everything that was kind of been, presented in here today, and when you looked at the modules, is that, this is a big factor in the degradation of streams in urban areas. And a lot of times, there's very little that one landowner themselves can do to affect that, because this is occurring at a watershed scale. Other than getting involved with city government and encouraging, adoption of these low impact development strategies kind of higher up in the watershed. But what vegetation alone may not prevent erosion and the creek from degrading, but a bit of resistance, and it is more resilient, so that you're better off and better protected from those degrading forces if you have some vegetation in place to resist those erosive forces.
In these urban areas, especially, I think where we're talking about now, the last areas to be developed are the creeks and riparian areas, because that's the least friendly place to live. No one wants to live down where it's going to get flooded. So if they're the last to be manipulated, that gives us perfect opportunity to say we need a wider buffer, widen the existing grass and tree line out instead of narrowing it down to the banks. And that'll help the creek as much as anything. Developing good, we might call it a storm drain going down toward that creek, but if you can let that flow across some good native tall vegetation, that'll slow water down, filter some of the pollutants and sediments out before it gets into the creek. But it's a problem, it is. I can't recall the name of it right now. The creek that is between the ballpark and AT&T Stadium in Arlington, they did a rehab on about 3 miles of that back about 20 years ago. And I think it was $2 million a mile to rehab that. But it was getting a lot of pressure from development, parking lots. It's just a huge urban area there. And I went by this, back about 2 months ago, and the company that did it advertised that they were using a lot of native plants. But if you go and look at it now, the most common native is a cedar elm tree and thickets out there, and it's mowed grass. It looks like a golf course grass out there. I don't know what it is, and it's right down to the water. There's very little sediment piles up. They clean it. So again, we've got to calibrate our eye on what we think is healthy and stable, because that short grass is not going to have enough root system to withstand the heavy flows. If we get into 2015 and 2016 were very wet years across all of Texas, especially North Texas. And if we get into having more of those back-to-back wet years and multiple flood events happening in each year, these weakened creeks are certainly in peril. So having as good a buffer as possible is probably the best you can do. And that just needs to be written into the development during the early stages, that we can't go any closer than this width. And it may be a 1/4 mile, it might need to be a 1/2 mile. of width on either side of the creek to protect those creeks.
And at municipal scales, there are examples throughout the state of, been implemented, at municipal levels where they require a buffer depending on the size and stream order. So, there's an ephemeral stream that connects to 2 other ephemeral streams, and that increases the, that next main stem down will have, a little bit wider of a buffer required with any new development. And those watershed ordinances are, written into the planning and development codes at a municipal wide level. So that can be, one area of influence over how much impact some of these developments have on our stream resources.
And then
But Claire, I
oh,
would,
yes.
I would just like to add to that right quick, and Ricky and Ryan may want to comment as well, but we're talking about creeks and rivers with increased flow due to impervious covers, whether it's the highway or whether it's the development or urbanizing or for whatever reason the flow is increasing into that creek. Unfortunately, it makes it flashy, and down here where I'm at, I'm in flash flood central. We get 2 inches of rain, we're going to get some washouts, and it's going to be a flood event. So I always look back at 2 things I wanted to comment on. First, I feel like creeks and streams are in a sense self-healing, in that as these conditions change, that creek's going to adjust and work itself out on its own. Unfortunately, for folks that live along the banks of that creek, that may mean that the channel meanders more. That may mean that the channel downcuts some. That may mean that there's bank erosion in certain areas and there's sediment deposits in others. So these are all things that we have to expect as these events occur, and we increase the flow in a creek, that creek's going to compensate and try to work things out on its own. And unfortunately, it may be to the detriment of the downstream landowners that, that's going on. So I just wanted to kind of mention that and keep that in mind, that they do adjust, and it's actually not that unnormal. I mean, it's kind of a normal event for a creek, even though it can be severe and catastrophic in certain situations as that flow increases. And the other side of this is I think if we look back at the very basics and most simplistic forms and think back to the old water cycle that we all saw, at least I did. Probably I was probably in junior high when I was first exposed to it, or elementary school, where the rain falls on the land, a majority of that runoff on a healthy rangeland or a healthy riparian area or a healthy farm is going to, that water's going to soak in, and some of it's, when we switch the tides on this and turn this thing around, all of a sudden we've got more running off and less going in the ground. So we get the flash flood. It's severe and catastrophic for maybe a day, and then it's gone. Because also, in addition, because we don't have it soaking in, it's not there to filter back in slowly. And it's not there to recharge the groundwater. And there's also recharge flows along these creeks and streams from that water that we're holding in the banks and we're holding in the uplands that is slowly working down. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's really difficult sometimes to stop this. You got to get out ahead of it, because once the area is urbanized, it's very difficult to control it. And we may be just needing to look at we know that this has happened, and we know the flow has increased, and we know the creek is going to adjust. How do we make this as palatable for a landowner as we possibly can? And what do we need to adjust to help that landowner with this new situation that has occurred upstream of them? And I'll refer to Ricky and Ryan on that, see if they have anything additional they'd like to add to that.
That's a great summation.
I'm gonna jump around just quickly because there was someone posted a little bit of clarification for her question about clearing the old trees and brush from previous storms, saying that this is a low water crossing that is blocking the flow of a long creek. So are there different management suggestions y'all have in that situation?
I think I would suggest if it's a creek that's big enough that you use it frequently to drive across and you need access there, bring in a track hoe, which it looks like a huge backhoe, but it will have a an attachment, if I can get my hand turned right. It has a what's called a live thumb, and so it can pick up trees and just pick them up, move them over to the downstream side with a low water crossing and drop them off. That way you're still giving the creek access to the woody plants. They may wash down and you may want to scatter them a little bit across the width of the bottom of the creek to help them move. But that's very low impact. That you're not, that machine's got a long arm and can reach a long ways without moving the tracks. And it can pick up a huge tree, a huge stump. That's one option for cleaning those. If it's just a few trees and you can do it with a chainsaw and pitch them over and pitch them downstream, and you're good to go there.
And then what can be done about identifying and addressing unlawful upstream damming of creeks?
Primary regulatory agencies that are going to be involved with that are, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, because they regulate water rights, and an impoundment can, affect a downstream water right. And they also, have some purview over water quality impacts, which dams, installation of dams, without the correct permit can impact that. So, and then the other regulatory agency would be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Fort Worth District. If you just type in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regulatory, there's a general line you can call, and they can address some of those. So, those in most creeks in this area that have, some intermittent flow, those are regulated activities within those creek beds.
If it's a small, like a tank or a earthen dam just meant for livestock water, those are often permitted by the agencies Ryan mentioned. But the problem can be if you build one too small for the watershed, it's going to just wash it out the next time it gets a high flow. So they have to be, these structures need to be sized for the watershed that you're dealing with. And the Natural Resources Conservation Service as an agency has staked many a pond for livestock water, but we don't stake them down in these creeks because they are too flashy. We get up on the uplands in a small little depressional draw, and you can put that pond there. But if they're building something in the creek itself that is over 200 acre feet of storage, they are supposed to have a permit from TCEQ. If they're building one over 50 acre feet, they're supposed to inform TCEQ about that. They don't have to have a permit, but they're supposed to let them know, because the more of those large dams that you have, it, like Ryan said, it reduces downstream water to public use. But, I don't know, talking to a county commissioner may be a starting spot to see, what they think about it. You can look on Google Earth and probably do some measuring as far as surface acres. You won't be able to tell acre feet of depth, but you can get an idea of the size. 200 acre feet would be a pond or a lake, actually not a pond, but a lake that's say 20 acres in surface area, averaging 10 foot of depth. And those are very expensive to build. They're not just something you go out there and build with one dozer. It takes a lot of surveying and a lot of equipment to build those. So a lot of expense.
Another question is, I'm a student studying wildlife biology, but I'm interested in being involved in this field of study. Any suggestions about things I should study?
Yeah, sure. And the, you know, as interdisciplinary and as you can become gives you a variety of different perspectives that'll improve, you know, how you manage for wildlife. So, you know, I work personally with a bunch of wildlife biologists. You know, my role here at Parks and Wildlife is as a conservation biologist, but my background is also in geography. So, you know, that entailed a lot of, you know, study of geomorphology and hydrology, but also water resources management. Work in the biology department with native plants of Texas and biogeomorphology, things like that. So just kind of get as interdisciplinary as you can, and you know, find out what those other courseworks are available to you at your place of study that, you know, might touch on some plants. But you might find them in the geography department. You might find them, you know, there where you are in the biology department.
I'd echo that. That's good information Ryan gave there. Anyone that's working in the outdoor field, range management, wildlife, whatever, you need to be a student of plants. And a lot of times in a straight wildlife degree plan, you may get very little native plant identification courses. However, those that study range management usually get one or more courses. So jump over into some of those range courses and take as much plant ID as you can. It'll help you greatly down the road.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, that most of our wildlife biologists that work for Texas Parks and Wildlife, if they didn't have a background in, you know, native plants, they had to quickly learn it once they were working professionally in the field, because habitat manipulation, you know, when you're manipulating for a certain species, you know, whether you're targeting upland game birds or, you know, non-game species, Houston toad, you know, whatever it is that you're targeting, you're going to be manipulating for vegetation and cover. Whether it's opening up cover or creating more cover. One of the biggest components is, in addition to water, is you know, plant life. So, you know, learn as much as you can, and that'll help you greatly on down the road.
You know, one thing I would add as well is I think you could ask and sit down and visit with any of us that are working as instructors today, and we would all kind of tell you the same thing. Study what you're interested in, focus on those areas that pique your interest, and set a goal for yourself that I'm going to be one of the best that I can be in this specific area. You know, I for instance, starting out when you're at that stage, you have some ideals of what you might be interested in, but a lot of times you're not really so sure. I myself have a bachelor's and a master's in animal science, kind of basic agricultural type degrees with a little bit of wildlife and biology background. But as my career progressed along, I found this interest in water quality and this interest in stream and riparian work. And so I focused on that. And every time I see an opportunity to expound that knowledge, I try to take it. And through that, you're always doing something that you're interested in and it fascinates you. You're not bored with the instruction. And at the same time, you're learning more and more as it goes. The other thing that I would say is lean on your peers heavily. Ricky Lennox, one of our instructors here, is recently retired from our agency, and I have leaned heavily on Ricky and his expertise and knowledge in that plant side. And Ricky, I admire you, and I appreciate the knowledge that you bring and your willingness to share it with not only myself, but everybody that's out there if they're willing to listen to you. And so that's what I would recommend is try to be an expert, try to be the best that you can in your area that you're interested in, and then seek out these individuals that are in those positions already and learn everything that you can from them.
Yeah, and I would add, I think a lot of the agencies here, but other ones as well, have internships or opportunities where you can kind of get your feet wet and learn more about it. Because like everyone's been saying, it's a very interdisciplinary field. So based on your specialty or your interest, you can kind of go a lot of different paths. So definitely being able to explore that is a nice opportunity. And Programs like this, there's a lot of other ones out there. So taking those and learning, and like Kyle said, talking to those professionals are a great first step. So I haven't seen any other new questions come in. One topic that we haven't talked much about today, but I know it's a big issue, maybe not as much in the Joel Pool Lake watershed, but is management of wild pigs. So I'm wondering, Josh, if you could spend a few moments just kind of highlighting, proper management on how to try to reduce some of those populations.
Sure. Am I coming through there?
Yes.
Okay. I was just thinking that, man, nobody must have any problems with wild pigs in the Joe Pool Lake watershed. But, earlier people were mentioning about the proliferation of species. And one thing that gets overlooked is that wild pigs are significant contributors towards that. The Chinese tallow tree, China berry, all of your oriental and invasives can be proliferated by wild pigs. So if you're concerned about controlling your invasive species, you need to be controlled about another exotic invasive species, which of course is wild pigs. And probably the main thing that I would just want to state for this is we have our tools of wild pig management, and I like to break those tools down into tools of population reduction and then also tools of pressure. And so when we're just getting into it, we notice we got some wild pigs all over our property. One of the things we want to look at first is our tools of population reduction. Now these are, well, let me back up. What we have currently for legal options in Texas is trapping, aerial gunning, snaring, trained dogs, and then sport hunting or strategic shooting. And so trapping and aerial gunning are our two methods that are research proven to be independently capable of reducing populations. And so when we're getting into wild pig management, when we notice that, hey, we want to stop some of this proliferation of invasive species, we got to get rid of these wild pigs. Probably the most accessible thing for folks to look at is trapping. And I mean, mostly because not everybody has a helicopter and a machine gun, right? But so trapping is probably where we want to start. And then if you have a large enough property, certainly getting into aerial gunning. But when we talk about trapping, there's a big mistake that's made all across Texas, and that is, you got a pig problem, you go to the local feed store, and what do they want to do? They want to sell you a 4x8 box trap with some sort of rooter type gate that the pigs can push their way through. Now the research on this is pretty clear. Box traps can certainly be a very effective tool in wild pig management, but generally they result in single captures, and the single captures, 1 or 2 pigs that you get, can create long-term trap aversion. And so what I like to talk about is trapping at the sounder level, and it's pretty simple. It's essentially leaving no witnesses. We need to be utilizing traps that are large enough to contain the total number of individuals that we're after, and we need to go through a process of pre-baiting and conditioning so that we can try to remove all of the pigs in the sounder that we've identified. Now, a sounder of pigs is kind of like a herd of buffalo or a flock of geese. It's just a large group of pigs. But essentially, that's all I really wanted to bring up is hey, these pigs do proliferate the invasive species. It does come at the expense of our native species like oaks and hickories and that sort of thing. And we do want to be looking at our population reduction techniques such as trapping and aerial gunning. And aside from that, I mean, I know that's kind of a broad intro in there, but if there's any questions about wild pigs, I'm happy.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So if you have any questions about feral hog management or any other final questions, I'll wait a few moments to see if anything else pops in. If not, I will say I'll send out this PowerPoint, and also I saw Heather posted hers in the chat, so I'll send that out as well, so you have everyone's contact information and some of those links that Heather provided in her presentation. So just some final things before I do my my giveaway of these remarkable riparian books is we have recorded this meeting, so I'm going to get it downloaded and then I'll send it out to y'all in a follow-up email. For those of you who took the course and are looking for CEUs, so once you finish the course, there's a certificate section, and based on the CEU you're looking for, you'll want to download that CEU and that certificate and keep it for your record. For those that require license numbers, I go in and download those and then submit them to the professional society that you have provided for. So if you haven't, make sure to download those so you can get your CEU credits. And just a reminder, so if you haven't finished the course, or maybe you haven't even started yet, you will continue to have access to the course. Excuse me. So you're welcome to rewatch it or finish watching it at your leisure. So, and then if you have any other questions as you're finishing it up, please reach out to us and we will be happy to either point you in the right direction or answer your question. So with that, I have been keeping track of everyone who's been asking questions. I thank you all for your questions and the discussion, and I thank the instructors too for all of their feedback and advice throughout the discussion today. So I've got my spreadsheet on a different computer, but I will generate our first number, which is 30. So Kara Knuckles, are you still online? Let me see. Yes, okay, so Kara, you have won our first remarkable riparian booklets. So I will make sure to email you after the program to confirm a mailing address. And then the next one, 46 is Ricky. I'm not gonna give you one, Ricky. 7, Carol Feldman. I think I saw 2. Yes, okay, so Carol Feldman.
I am here.
Woohoo, so Carol and Kara, you are our 2 winners. Congratulations, and I will be reaching out to get y'all's mailing address, and I will get those sent over to you by the end of this week. So thank y'all for sticking around and participating in our program. We really hope we're going to be able to be in person again starting in the fall, so we can actually see y'all in person and get out to the field. So be on the lookout for upcoming programs in your area, and thank y'all. So there is for the 2 people who didn't, there is a website. It's remarkableriparian.org. I'll try to post it, repair.org, where you can order it. I think maybe the Meadow Center, you can also order them through there, but that is where you can order some of those books. I think it's somewhere around $40 for the joint field guide and owner's manual.
Thanks, Claire.